So we are continuing in Acts 16, and we're on the second missionary journey, and there's a lot of geography in this, so I thought I'd bring the map. So in Acts 15, we had the church in Antioch up here, which is modern-day Turkey, right near the border with Turkey and Syria, and Lebanon. And there was this dispute about, okay, what are we going to ask of Gentiles? And then they came to a determination that, okay, we need to escalate this. We need to bring this down to Jerusalem. So they go to Jerusalem down here for the council. That was the big decision in Acts 15. And the main gist of it was, as we all know, because we're all Gentiles and not practicing Judaism, the Gentiles did not have to formally convert to Judaism. They were asked to abstain from food sacrificed to idols, from things strangled, from ingesting blood, and from sexual immorality. So 4 things. And then that was it. And then we saw at the end of last chapter 15, they're back in Antioch. They wanted to go back and revisit the first missionary journey, which was this route here with Cyprus and then Perga and then city in Antioch and through there. But they had this dispute over John Mark. Barnabas wants to bring John Mark with him because trying to restore him and encourage him, lift him up. If you remember, the first missionary journey, they got here, and for whatever reason, we aren't really told, John Mark says, I'm out, I'm done, I'm going back. And so we don't know why that is, but Paul viewed that as a betrayal. And he viewed it as, the word he used was desertion. So he couldn't handle it. So am I going to bring him, someone like that, back on a mission trip again? I don't think so. Whereas Barnabas, who is his relative, wants to say, yes, let's restore him, let's give him a second chance. And I think either way you look at that, you could make an argument for what Paul did, and you can make an argument for what Barnabas did. If someone was willing to be restored, we don't know what John Mark's attitude was then. Was he humbled? Was he repentant? Or was he kind of acting the same? And then that's why Paul acted the way he did. So they split up. Barnabas and Mark go to Cyprus, and then that's really the last we hear of Barnabas. We're going to hear of John Mark again, because he's going to end up in Rome over here with Peter and Paul near the end of their lives, and Paul's going to say, bring John Mark because he's useful to ministry. So John Mark and Paul got restored and reconnected, but for now they're separated. So he grabs Silas and from Antioch, and then they're going to set out along the same, retracing their steps along the second, it's called the second missionary journey now, and they're going to be in southern Turkey. So can someone read verses 1 and 2?
Paul went first to Derbe and then to Lystra, where there was a young disciple named Timothy. His mother was a Jewish believer, but his father was a Greek. Timothy was well thought of by the believers in Lystra and Iconium.
So kind of acting in reverse, whereas on the first missionary journey they went to Cyprus and then here and then down that way, they're going in the opposite direction, counterclockwise. And so this is basically we're going to check in. We visited you once, and then taught you, and then we came back and we established leadership, elders, and that was in Acts 14. And then now we're coming back and doing another check-in. So the thought here is that he raised Timothy up, or he discipled Timothy, and now a couple of years have gone by, he goes back to the same area, and now Timothy is doing great. He's flourishing, he's matured, he's now maybe a leader, and he's well thought of. And so Cody notes here, as suggested previously, Timothy may have been converted through Paul's ministry during the first visit to Lystra. And so this is this region here. We're going to find something interesting about Timothy, and Paul makes a very interesting choice here. Can someone read verse 3?
So Paul wanted him to join them on their journey. In deference to the Jews of the area, he arranged for Timothy to be circumcised before they left, for everyone knew that his father was a Greek.
So, interesting, right? We just saw in Acts 15 that people don't have to be circumcised in order to be believers. And then almost the very next thing Paul does is he circumcises someone. And so we aren't told why. We have to speculate. Some people, the way it reads is like, okay, he's just doing this to placate the Jews. But if you know Paul, I don't see him doing that, right? I don't see him capitulating. I don't see him compromising. Another way to look at it is the Acts 15 decision was for Gentiles only. If you're Jewish and you're going to follow a Jewish Messiah, then you need to be following the law, which is the covenant, the commandment of circumcision that was given to Abraham. And so I kind of lean towards that second, because we're going to see later in Jerusalem that Paul is going to bring sacrifices. He's going to observe the feasts. Paul doesn't ever say he's not Jewish anymore. So I think there's a different standard for Jews than Gentiles. And he almost reminds me here of when they spent their time in the wilderness, and then Moses dies, Joshua's about to bring them in, and they're about to cross, and God says, time out. No one here in this group has been circumcised, so we're gonna pause right now, and they're we're ready for battle, right? They're ready to go in, and you want us to do what? Okay, so they're gonna take 3 days and and heal. Because God says you need to roll away the reproach of Egypt, and they do this at Gilgal, and then they march in. So it's almost that Timothy is almost reminiscent of the person who should know, but they haven't been walking close, and now Timothy's coming back, and so the circumcision will be a sign of his restoration here. Lots of ways to look at it. I don't know, is that what you've?
Yeah, I've never thought about it before, but the first thing that comes to mind is I become in all things to all people, so that I might win some, which kind of is similar to what you're talking about with the first thing, placating people. But I do think that there's a profit of it would profit Timothy to be circumcised, having a Jewish mom and going into ministry amongst people who are Jewish.
Yes.
That they would be like, why would we listen to you teach the scriptures when you're not even circumcised, right? So, but yeah, that second one's a good point too, as well, though.
There's definitely a practical side to it, right? It didn't hurt, but we're going to see that other people, he says, no, don't be circumcised. So there could be a distinction there. So now we're in these Derbe, Lystra, Iconium. You can see this is all that says we're in the region of Galatia here. There's another. We don't know exactly when Paul wrote Galatians. Some say it was after this second journey is completed. Some say it was between the first and second journeys. So there's a potential that if you read Galatians, it's not it's not the kindest letter that Paul's ever written. Right? He calls them bewitched. You foolish Galatians. Who's bewitched you? And so hard words. And so now he's going back and saying, okay, did you take those words in the spirit that I meant them, which was to restore you and build you up and keep you on the right track. We're going to see that there's remember Lystra is the city that didn't have enough Jews to have a synagogue, so it was very much a Gentile area, and so Paul now has the Acts 15 decision that he can lean into and say, look, what I told you was validated by the elders in Jerusalem, and so that's kind of the spirit of why he's checking in. Did we read 4 and 5?
Not yet.
4 and 5, yeah.
Then they went from town to town, instructing the believers to follow the decisions made by the apostles and elders in Jerusalem. So the churches were strengthened in their faith and grew larger every day.
So again, going back and saying, look, you don't have to convert to this primarily Gentile audience. Very much good news for that. Yeah, we already talked about that. Okay, 6. How about 6 through 8?
I got it. Next, Paul and Silas traveled through the area of Phrygia and Galatia because the Holy Spirit had prevented them from preaching the word in the province of Asia at that time. Then coming to the borders of Mysia, they headed north for the province of Bithynia. But again, the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them to go there. So instead, they went through Mysia to the seaport of Troas.
So imagine we're going to go to Del Rio. We're making a Del Rio trip. And the Spirit says, no, I want you to go to Corpus Christi, right? I mean, it's like, wait a minute, we had all this planned out. and so to be prevented, we don't know how he was prevented, whether it was a dream or whether, he roadblocks, who knows. So apparently when he gets to Pisidian Antioch, which is where he was in the first journey, we think there's a valley that runs through here, and this is Laodicea, and then Ephesus here. So the thought is he wanted to go to this region here and minister, which he will end up doing at the end of the journey. He'll land in Ephesus. But it's interesting taking a 40,000 foot view. Someone else is going to have this region covered, right? It's going to be John, and Paul's going to visit here, but it's going to be primarily John. And then Jesus is going to write 7 letters to these churches in here in Revelation.
I think it's interesting that the Holy Spirit has 2 names. The Holy Spirit and the Spirit of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember ever hearing the Spirit of Jesus for the name of the Holy Spirit.
That's a good pickup. Yeah, I didn't notice that. Yeah. So he wants to go here, and then Spirit says no. He wants to go through. This is Phrygia here. He gets here. He probably wants to go up. This is Byzantium up here, modern day Istanbul. And so this is the region of Bithynia. So he probably wants to go to the big center, and Spirit says no. Make a turn here and go to Troas at the coast, right? And he's now at the coast, nowhere to go, almost reminiscent of Moses saying, I can't go that way, I can't go this way, I can't go back, and there's only water in front of me, so what's going to happen here? And so they end up in Troas, which is very close to ancient Troy, and there's a city that we stayed in. This is all kind of on our trip in October. We went to Pergamum, and then we spent the night in this region here, and it's on the coast. And then the next day, we're basically picking up this journey that we're reading in Acts 16, which is pretty cool. So this is the region of where Troy is, nice harbor. And then what's kind of interesting is if you saw the movie Troy, that's the prop that they used, and it's this huge thing, and they donated it to the city. And it's kind of a big tourist attraction right on the water, so it's kind of fun.
Kind of off topic, but what is it made out of?
It's just wood. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I think they pitched it or something to stand up to the weather, but
Interesting.
yeah. Not the greatest movie, but it was. If you saw it, it was entertaining. Yeah.
Definitely decent.
Yeah.
Got the history right.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's interesting because all of this region. If I go back, it's, Alexander the Great was from Macedonia. His father was Philip of Macedon. And so he kind of goes this direction, and then he works this way, but he's conquering. Paul, I don't know if this is intentional or not, but Paul is now about ready to cross from Asia into Europe, not conquering, but bringing freedom, right? Bringing salvation. And so, I don't know if that's intentional, but he's almost following the same footsteps as Alexander the Great did. Anything else on Troas? Okay. I think we're at 9.
Just 9?
9, 10.
And a vision appeared to Paul in the night. A man of Macedonia was standing there, urging him and saying, Come over to Macedonia and help us. And when Paul had seen the vision, immediately we sought to go on into Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them.
So, want to go here, blocked. Want to go north, blocked. Now, by being patient, I think that's the lesson for us, is being obedient when the Spirit says no or the Spirit says not yet. That usually means I've got something better for you. And so they get to Troas, and then they see this, Paul gets this vision. And of course, all of us are primarily of European descent, and this is going to change the whole world because we're going to be included in this. And that's going to spread all the way around the world the other way. So note also it says we decided to leave. And so they think that now Luke is changing to the first person, because this is probably where Luke joined them here. And so all up to now, Luke's been getting this, secondhand stories, and he's been writing it down, and he always says they, but then all of a sudden it's, the pronoun changes to we, so we think Luke is here. So I think, again, the lesson is just being obedient, and when God says no, Paul says, okay, Lord, then what? And when God says no to us, we can say, okay, I'll be obedient. I don't really understand it, but then just being ready to hear the next step as they move. This is a painting that's in the town of Berea, which we'll get to in Acts 17, and talks about kind of Paul ministering to the Bereans there, and so there's this little mosaic of the Berean call, Macedonian call, I mean. So kind of a big, that it was once, Judaism is obviously very centralized, right? It's Israel, and then now not even Turkey, it's Greece, and it's going to be Rome, and then it's going to be the rest of Europe. So kind of a big moment here with this Macedonian call. 11 and 12.
We boarded a boat at Troas and sailed straight across to the island of Samothrace, and the next day we landed at Neapolis. From there we reached Philippi, a major city of that district of Macedonia, and a Roman colony, and we stayed there for several days.
So they catch a boat from Troas to the island of Samothrace, and then they did that in a day, and then they did Samothrace to Neapolis, which is the harbor basically for Philippi. It's about 10 miles distance. And you're going to see that they're going to retrace this going the other way in a different time of year, and it's going to take them 5 days to get across. So they had favorable winds through here. Anything else? Neapolis is a town called Kavala, Greece, and it's a place we got to stay. And so this is a picture of the harbor, and it has a point, and so the main harbor is on one side, and then a nice beach area is on the other side, and that's where we got to stay. So it's just kind of cool to be there and say, oh yeah, this is where Paul landed. I guess we can go on to 13.
On the Sabbath, we went a little way outside the city to a riverbank, where we thought people would be meeting for prayer, and we sat down to speak with some women who had gathered there.
There's a lot of interesting historical timing about when Jesus came. And so, we had a couple thousand years where it was just focused on Israel, and then deportation to Babylon, and then before that time in Egypt. But it was really limited. And yet by the time Jesus comes, there's now a world religion. A world language, Greek. And now the Romans have built roads. So now the message can just go everywhere. And one of the main roads was this Via Egnatia, and it ran all the way across what was today northern Greece. And what it allowed you to do was people would travel from Rome to the opposite coast, and then take a boat and then follow the Ignatian way that led them all the way to Asia. And so now you've got this road system. And so you've got a common language, and you've got a common, this wide road system that goes throughout the Roman Empire, and now the message can just spread easily. So again, God's timing, using things that happen in the world, secular history, using them for his purposes.
Yeah, that's really fascinating too when it comes to language, because the Septuagint, by the Jewish, very anal retentive scholars, was translated, the Old Testament was translated into Greek 300 years before Christ.
Yes.
And so when Paul quoted scripture from the Old Testament, he often quoted the Greek version of the Hebrew. So, things were really coming together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, almost as if it had been orchestrated, right?
Yeah.
God designed it. It was. Hey, how about that?
Plus, having Hebrew translated to Greek helps us make sure we're studying the same thing in both Testaments by those anal retentive scholars.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because one Hebrew word could mean any number of different things when we translate it to English, but Greek is much more precise.
You keep stepping on the...
Okay. So the example is the Old Testament verse where it says a virgin shall become child. Well, in the Hebrew, that could mean a young woman, a maiden, a virgin. Well, when you translate that verse into Greek, the word is specifically a virgin, as the way we use the term. And so, again, it gives us that insight that Greek is so particular and precise that helps us to translate the Hebrew. So this is it's a ancient road that stretched all the way across Europe, and so Paul is going to follow this in the first part of Acts 16 and the first part of Acts 17. He's going to follow this Ignatian way, and if you've heard of the Appian way, it's the same type of it's a major road that stretched throughout the empire. So on the Sabbath day, they went. Did they go to a synagogue?
No, because
Yeah.
there wasn't 10 men.
Right.
Quorum means men,
Mm-hmm.
not women.
Yeah.
You could have 20,000 women, no synagogue.
And so what they would do is there were some Jews, there were some women there, so they didn't have enough to form a synagogue. But what they would do was they called it a place of prayer, and we think there's two rivers that are in the region, and one of them's this one here. And so because they were so, ritual purity was such a big deal, which is kind of what led to the decision in Acts 15. If there's a number of reasons why a Jew would have to immerse in water to become ritually pure, one of those is for a woman every month. Assuming you're not pregnant, then you would have to, as soon as your cycle ended, then you would immerse in the river. And so that's one of the thinkings that they're meaning by a river here.
A really weird thing about being raised a Sabbath keeper myself, did they walk too far?
Yeah.
I mean, the way we kept Sabbath, we went hiking on Sabbath afternoon. But, I mean, in that day, the Jewish had all these 624 rules
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah. So today there's where we think Lydia was baptized and where all this happened was this little baptismal area here, just a beautiful spot on the river here. And so I just took this in October when we were there. And so, we read 14, right?
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah.
Why do Christians not have to bathe in order to be cleansed again? Was that, like Jesus said, that just wasn't necessary?
Yeah, and so in fact we're going to get to that passage in a couple Wednesdays from now, where the whole ritual cleanliness thing, and so what, not even so much what was taught, but the way that it was being interpreted was you had to clean everything. And then Jesus is going to come around in Mark 7 and say, no, it's the inside. Defilement comes from within. It comes from our bad thoughts, and it comes from our words. This cup, is not going to make you defiled by So he kind of changed the focus. They had gotten off track, and of course, do we ever get off track with our rules and our procedures and our rituals? So that's the lesson there.
The idea that a woman would be unclean, like, it just is very strange to me. Like, why would a woman be unclean just for having a natural cycle, whereas a man?
Yeah, and it's not sin. It's just it's just a purity thing.
Yeah.
Every time a man, we're all adults. If a man has an emission, then a man's unclean.
Yeah.
So it's all. It's just that the way God said it. You had, and the thought is you had something like that and didn't bring life. So there's a defilement there.
Especially it had to do with blood.
Yeah, and the blood too.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was most definitely a practical, hygienic purpose to those as well.
At that time, absolutely.
Yeah, not yet, because like he said, it wasn't just the blood, but it was also with men as well.
Yeah.
Like if that happened with men, it was.
And by washing, that actually improved their health.
Yeah.
Right.
Whereas the Gentiles had some really strange practices.
Yeah.
Not so clean.
Well,
Yeah, there's an interesting study that like Jewish women hardly ever get cervical cancer.
Yes.
And what's the difference? Well, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's bizarre.
The way it used to be. I don't know.
But back then they didn't have showers or baths. I mean, it had to be very intentional to bathe, so they weren't bathing every day.
Right.
And I think maybe part of it was encouragement to stay clean.
Stay clean.
Mm-hmm.
But the Romans were great at making baths.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, all their bathhouses.
Yeah. Yeah, they were, and it's.
But they were doing other things. And
Yes.
they-
We don't go there. What was going on in the bathhouse?
Very
They
clean.
were not necessarily just getting clean.
So anyway, beautiful spot. Where did we leave off? Did we get 14?
We haven't done it yet.
Okay, 14.
One of them was Lydia from Thyatira, a merchant of expensive purple cloth, who worshipped God. As she listened to us, the Lord opened her heart, and as she accepted what Paul was saying.
There it is. All right, so Thyatira is over here. It's one of the 7 churches that is in Revelation, and so she ended up going the same way. She just got there before Paul did. And it's interesting, there's a theme in Luke about wealthy women. And in Luke, I think it's chapter 8, he talks about Susanna and Joanna and how they were wealthy and financed the ministry. Well, this purple dye, and it may have come from a mollusk, or it may have come from a root. In any case, it was very rare and very sought after. So the fact that she dealt in this, meant she had some wealth. And then now, okay, one of the answers as to why maybe Paul was sent here was, okay, now you're gonna have some financial backing too, in addition to, more importantly, starting the church at Philippi. Also in this, I'm not huge on churches in the Holy Land usually, because they're usually dark and lots of icon everywhere and candles, and but this chapel where Lydia was, where Paul and Lydia were, had these very nice, modern, it's more recent, had these beautiful murals, and it just kind of told the story of Acts 16. And even though the words were in Greek, if you read this chapter as we're doing, you kind of knew what was going on. So kind of very nicely well done. So she, 15, she and her household were baptized. She asked us to be her guests. If you agree, I am a true believer in the Lord, she said, come and stay at my home. And she urged us all, and we agreed. So this moment is the first European convert is Lydia. And so, kind of something we mark if those of us of European descent, we all owe back to Acts 16, because this is where it all started. And we're going to see later that the first Gentile is also converted a little later in the chapter.
So this is the first time they're in Europe?
Yes.
Modern in Europe?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they're in what today is Greece.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's see. We don't know anything about Mr. Lydia. That's funny. Okay. Verse 16.
One day, as we were going down to the place of prayer, we met with a slave girl who had a spirit that embedded her and to tell the future. She earned a lot of money, and her master was telling fortunes.
So also the first thing, and very common in the Roman Empire, I think older translations would say she had a Pythian spirit. And that comes from Python, because that was kind of one of their big superstitions, was that they had this snake fascination. And if you look at, again, we talked about before, our modern medicine logo has snake imagery, so it all comes from Greco-Roman times. It goes back to, if you've heard of Delphi, there was called the Oracle at Delphi, and what it was a priestess would go in and consult with the snake god and then would tell fortunes. So she's connected to that. The Greek mythology is that Apollos slayed the python, and then this kind of led to all of this divination stuff. So it's interesting that there's no Jews in town, so paganism is just flourishing here. And apparently she was skilled enough at whatever she was fortune telling that she could charge for her divinations, and then they could make money off of this. So somehow she latches on to Paul, and we're going to see what she says here, 17 through 19.
Can I ask a question
Yeah,
real
yeah.
quick? How did she have the ability to tell the future?
They don't come out and say it, but it's demon possession.
Demon.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's
Yeah.
satanic because
Yeah.
it's not from Jesus.
No.
Okay.
But interesting, watch what she says though. Acts 16, 17 through 19.
She followed Paul and the rest of us, shouting, "These men are servants of the Most High God, and they have come to tell you how to be saved." This went on day after day until Paul got so exasperated that he turned and said to the demon within her, "I command you in the name of Jesus to come out of her." And instantly it left her. Her master's hopes of wealth were now shattered. So they grabbed Paul and Silas and dragged them before the authorities at the marketplace.
So, kind of, I mean,
Oh,
well, I know, I laugh too, right? It goes
Paul
on.
having become greatly annoyed.
And you would think Paul would have gotten annoyed the
I mean,
first time, right? Jesus
they're
never
like,
let them.
Day after day, though, that
Yeah.
would get
Yes.
tired. Like, oh, shut this girl up.
But like, it's kind of weird that the demon world knows who these people are, right? They say, Jesus, what do you want with us, Son of the Most High God? Well, no one else realized that he was the Son of the Most High God except the demons.
Have you come to torment us before
Yes,
the
the point in time, yeah. Which has a whole other rabbit trail on that, about the going cast it into the abyss.
So why were they against that witness?
I mean, Jesus never wanted the testimony of demons. So, and I think it's the same
Right.
thing here. Now, I don't know why Paul let it go on for days. You think he would just said, "I'm done with you."
Well, it's
So,
possible that he was trying to discern
yeah,
what this is.
yeah. And then after, we're told she has a
But I
spirit.
mean, today the people that seem demon possessed are saying,
Yeah.
there is no God. They're
Right.
saying the opposite.
Right.
But that's Romans 1:18 to 32. And many other
Hmm.
passages of Scripture.
So here's
I think it's important to remember, though, that there's also people, I believe, are demonically possessed today that
Yeah.
teach a false way of salvation too.
Yes,
Whether that's the
definitely.
prosperity gospel
Yes, definitely.
or cultic religions,
Yes.
Jehovah's Witness, Mormons, stuff like that as
Yes.
well. So I think it's important to remember that for whatever reason, right, certain demons behave certain ways, right?
Yeah.
So
And there's also like some scholars see, not so much here, but in the demoniac at Gadara, they saw the demon would have a voice, and then the man would try to work his way through. So we don't know if that's happening here, but the men are servants of the Most High God and come to tell you how to be saved. Well, that's not untrue, right? That's exactly why they were there. But Paul did not want that, and it's probably the way she was doing it, probably being loud and interruptive and
obnoxious,
trying to not, she's saying that to say, okay, yeah, we know what you're here. Just
Yeah,
you go away now.
She wasn't saying it in
Yeah.
a kind, like,
Right.
informative way.
Right.
She was trying to put them down
Not being
and
helpful.
speak
very,
poorly
very
of
possible
them.
as mockingly.
Yeah.
Yeah. She was being disruptive.
Yeah. But yeah,
These guys know the way to
Greatly
salvation.
annoyed. Yeah. So as Roman cities go, Philippi was like the little Rome. I mean, there were primarily Roman citizens that lived there. I read where it was basically retired people from the Roman army. A lot of them ended up in Philippi. And
So this is their Cancun.
yeah, it's kind of like their little paradise. And so this is the marketplace where Paul would have been brought as a restored Roman city. There are actually better places than what we saw in Greece. I think that the towns in Israel that have been restored, like Caesarea, they did a much nicer job getting you the feel. So you can see a lot of stuff is still toppled over, and they haven't, there's not a lot of attention to it, but you can just say, okay, here was a Roman city. So the marketplace, and then it's kind of an interesting scene here because we're going to find that Paul has a Roman citizen card that he can play, but he doesn't play it. And the question is he unwilling to play it, or was he unable to play it? And we don't know. So let's go ahead and read 20 through 21.
When they had brought them to the magistrates, they said, "These men are Jews, and they are disturbing our city. They advocate customs that are not lawful for us as Romans to accept or practice." You said the 22 or 21.
You can read through 24.
The crowd joined in attacking them. The magistrates tore the garments off of them and gave orders to beat them with rods. And when they had inflicted many blows upon them, they threw them into prison, ordering the jailer to keep them safely. Having received this order, he put them into the inner prison and fastened their feet in the stocks.
So the Rome, they have their religion, and you couldn't disrupt that greatly, but really what they were mainly concerned with was keeping order. And so they kind of had two rules: pay your taxes and don't revolt. And so with the people saying they're causing a revolt, they're causing us to do things that are illegal for us Romans to practice, well, that wasn't really true, but that was the charge. Because why? Because their money was being impacted. So always follow the money and all these things. And so then they quickly formed this, we might call it flash mob today. And then so the Roman authorities show up and they say, look, why is everyone I know mad at these two guys? So these two guys must be the problem, right? So they order them severely beaten, thrown into prison, and then put into stocks in like basically a maximum security of that day, right? The internal, they couldn't get out. Yeah. But problem is you can't do that to a Roman citizen without trial. And so Paul is going to have this, that for whatever reason he doesn't stop this from happening, but yet he could have. And so that's the kind of the curious thing. And so here's the scene where they're beaten with rods. There's a what they think is the prison. We aren't real sure, but it's a place you can visit today, which is kind of cool. He's going to reference this in Thessalonians. For you yourselves know, brothers and sisters, that our reception among you was not in vain. After we had already suffered and been treated abusively in Philippi, we had the boldness of our God to speak to you the gospel amid much opposition. So kind of now reading Acts gives you a different lens into reading Paul's letters and bringing all of these things forward.
One thing that comes to my mind is that perhaps Paul was saving that card for a more critical time.
Yeah.
It's like you don't put all your cards out there unless it's exactly the right time.
Mm-hmm. And what did Jesus say? Be wise as
serpents,
right?
and gentle as doves.
Yeah. So it's
Because what
God gave us the advanced, computing CPU power up here, and He wants us to use it, right? So
I mean, what if he had done it then? Then other places he had visited go, oh hey, be careful, he's a
Right.
Roman.
well, and he had an appointment with a jailer, right?
Yeah.
So
Or the
yeah.
jailer had an appointment
Yes.
with
Yeah.
him.
Let's read 25 through 30.
Sorry,
Oh, yeah.
this is kind of also off
No,
topic
fine.
a little bit, but I guess the main charge that they're unlawful in the eyes of the Romans. The Roman, I guess, government had to sanction all those different religions, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was like their main, I guess,
Right.
issue with them.
Yeah, and so all they did was cast a demon out, but it affected the guy's pocketbook, and so they trump up these charges.
Had Rome already kicked the Jews out of Rome at this time?
I think maybe so. In fact, one glad you mentioned that. One thing I read says maybe that Lydia ended up in Philippi because they had been kicked out of Rome. So
Well,
possibly.
because that time frame.
Yeah.
There
was anti-Jewish
so-
sentiment happening. Yeah.
Anti-Semitism was really high at the time. If it's at the time that Rome kicked them out.
Right. That was Claudius, like late
Yeah.
40s, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. So. 25.
Just 25?
Yeah.
Around midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening.
So what, again, why does all this happen in the order that it happens? What does Paul do here? He praises. And imagine being thrown in jail, like unjustly. You've just been beaten, you're in stocks, and you're praising. And so a definite lesson for us as we hit our road bumps in life yeah.
It only says his feet were in stocks.
Okay.
But it was Virginia that had him up here.
Yeah, right. So, again, in that predicament, you're sore, you're hurting, and yet you're praising and praying. So he says in Colossians, let the word of Christ richly dwell within you with all wisdom and teaching, admonishing another with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing with thankfulness in your hearts to God. And so now he's, after having this experience, he now writes Colossians and he can say, always praise, always sing songs. 26 and 27.
Suddenly there was a massive earthquake, and the prison was shaken to its foundations. All the doors immediately flew open, and the chains of every prisoner fell off. The jailer woke up to see the prison doors wide open. He assumed the prisoners had escaped, so he drew his sword to kill himself.
So another jailbreak in Acts, and very literal chain breaking here. So our God is one who can break chains. So a massive earthquake. The region was known for earthquakes, but obviously there was something different about this one. And then this translation says the chains of every prisoner fell off. So it wasn't just Paul and Silas, it was everyone in jail. And so imagine that one of the things that we read is if you're a jailer and your prisoner escapes, you've got to serve the sentence. So now that the prisoner would have. And so now, who knows how many were there, but he thinks they've all left. And so it's over for me. I'm just gonna cash it in. And then 28 through 30.
But Paul shouted to him, "Stop! Don't kill yourself. We are all here." The jailer called for lights and ran into the dungeon and fell down, trembling before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them out and asked, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?"
So what a witness for the other prisoners, right? They're, wouldn't, it would seem to be natural to think, oh, the door's open, I'm making a run for it. But Paul says we are all here. So this wasn't just the jailer for the jailer's benefit. This was every prisoner in that building was now paying attention to Paul. And so you have a scene where, and the question is, how did this jailer know to ask that question? Did he hear the teaching? Was it something that had already happened amongst the other prisoners and the Spirit was moving and then he was led to ask that question?
Probably because Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right?
They must have, I guess, kind of lured them in somehow for them to all stay there. Every single one of them.
Why can't that happen now? I'm thinking of my relatives who are on another planet in their ideology.
Mm-hmm.
Well, perhaps instead of his thinking, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" He's thinking from the officials because I'm the dead
Maybe,
man.
yeah. But Paul answers in 31. Can we read?
And they said, "Believe in the Lord, and you will be saved, you and your household."
So if he meant that, then Paul says, no, I'm going to tell you how to really be saved. And that's the answer there. So how can a man be saved? By believing on the Lord Jesus Christ. So again, this is Rome, right?
Yeah.
You had all these different gods they had to worship to, and yet somehow this jailer knew potentially, or Paul was informing him that he wasn't, these gods aren't going to save you. The serpents and Apollo and Aphrodite and all that's not going to save you. This belief in this Lord that we're singing to, that gives us the spirit of peace, that even when we're in prison and even when we're beaten, we're still praising. Verse 32, 33.
And they shared the word of the Lord with him and with all who lived in his household. Even at that hour of the night, the jailer cared for them and washed their wounds. Then he and everyone in his household were immediately baptized.
We can read 34 too.
He brought them into his house and set a meal before them, and he and his entire household rejoiced because they all believed in God.
So the jailer is now taking care of his captive, right? This reversal. It's almost reminiscent of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. Who should be on top is now humbling himself. Again, this hospitality. So he invites them into the house and they're celebrating. I'm sure there was meat sacrificed to idols that was being served, and I'm sure the wine had been poured out, the first drink, to the gods. But yet, we don't know how Paul handled it. But whatever. Probably his all things to all people. He made peace, and they all believed. The witness was more important than the rules, and I think that's what we all need to remember. We have our rules that, but if we're having a salvation type of discussion, we have to be flexible and kind of meet people where they are, and I think that's what Paul did here.
So I guess, chronologically we don't really know the exact time frame, but if they're supposed to still be in prison and they're at his house, what's the timeline there?
Yeah, and we're not told because the next verse gets interesting. Read 35 and 36, someone?
But it was that day the magistrate sent the police saying, "Let those men go." And the jailer reported these words to Paul, saying, "The magistrates have sent to let you go. Therefore, come out now and go in peace." So
all of a sudden it's like, you guys can go now, right? So we don't know why they came to that decision. Was it because their prison's now in shambles? These guys must have had some power. But anyway, they came to the conclusion that we're going to let them go. But watch what Paul does. Can someone read 37 through 40? We'll wrap it up.
But Paul said to them, "They have beaten us publicly, uncondemned, men who are Roman citizens and have thrown us into prison. And do they now throw us out secretly? No. Let them come themselves and take us out." The police reported these words to the magistrates, and they were afraid when they heard that they were Roman citizens. So they came and apologized to them, and they took them out and asked them to leave the city. So they went out of the prison and visited Lydia, and when they had seen the brothers, they encouraged them and departed.
So I have to imagine Paul's like enjoying this moment, right? And then look what you did to me, and now look what I'm about to do to you. Now I could go to Thessalonica and report you, because as a Roman citizen, what you did was illegal, and but I'm not gonna do that. You just have to apologize to me publicly.
So they were Roman citizens?
Paul was, yeah. Paul and Silas were.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
And you can't do this to a Roman citizen without
a trial. Okay.
So so Paul's kind of grandstanding here, but maybe there's a reason, because now the converts have legitimacy, right? And it was very much an honor and shame society. So if Paul was shamed like this and he let it stand, then everyone associated with him would, in a sense, carry that shame. And so by demanding this, make it right scene here, he's making it easier for the people he's leaving behind, for Lydia. And so you just imagine this. The guy's now nervous, right? Because we just beat a Roman citizen, and that that could be it for me. Please just go away, leave, bye. But he doesn't. He goes back to Lydia's house, and
I have a question in there. So on 35 and 36, it said the next morning the city officials sent the police to tell the jailer to let him go.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't know they were Romans at that point.
Right.
So why did they do that?
We don't know. Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah.
Could have been the earthquake.
Could have been the earthquake and the supernatural power that seems to be behind them. Or they did some research and they found out that the guys who had the fortune teller, the complaint was bogus, and that was just because you lost out on your revenue.
So your cells could be locked.
Yeah. And so then basically going back to Lydia, now he's got a church, right, or an ecclesia, a body. He's got the prisoner, he's got the jailer, and now he's got the women, and soon he's going to write a letter to these people called Philippians. And I think it's interesting that there's a lot of great themes in Philippians, but he brings up hospitality. And he says, "No church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving except you alone," Philippians 4. "Consider another more important as yourselves," to Philippians. And again, "let your gentle spirit be known to all people." So again, there's lots of joy in Philippians. Joy through suffering, a lot of themes here. But he's also got these way of being hospitable and loving each other and being gentle. And so that's Paul's first trip to Philippi. And then next 17, he's going to move on to Thessalonica, which is continue west. Yeah.
To me, it's also interesting how much more honoring of their laws the Romans were than we are.
Yeah, Cody brought that up this morning. He was on the men's call.
They had pretty severe
Yeah,
consequences for
yeah.
breaking the
Yeah.
law.
Well, which is a great deterrent for criminals.
It does
Yeah.
work. Yeah.
Keeps
Yeah.
people from doing really bad things.
Mm-hmm.
Like nowadays, people who do really horrible things get locked up and then they get released right away
Mm-hmm.
and don't ever really serve the time that they deserve for doing the things that they've done.
Or if they know somebody that's high up, they don't even give it
Yeah, they get a slap